We're joined also by a scholar in, among many other things, in Pan-African thought. That is by Dr. Fidelis Allen. Fidelis, given your very broad background, we're deeply curious about your perspective on the Afrik Akili Declaration.
Thank you. Let me also use this opportunity to thank the Chief, who is the custodian of the African culture, and thank everyone that is on this platform today. The theme of this year's World Indigenous Peoples Day is the role of Indigenous African women in the preservation and transmission of traditional knowledge. I want to dwell a little on the aspect of knowledge systems. I take this declaration today as a call for systematic review of the significance of knowledge systems when it comes to development of Africa. Now, the knowledge system has been undermined. If we look back to history and look at the influence of colonialism, look at the post-colonial state of Africa, and look at the knowledge systems that have driven politics, knowledge systems that have driven economic models. Look at the knowledge systems that have driven activities in the post-colonial state. Even the knowledge system of conceptual development that has driven research, knowledge generation in Africa. You'll find that most of the concepts were derived from the Western world, used to explain situations in Africa. And often, these concepts have no roots to the African situation. So the analysis that are generated regarding Africa are often not directly useful for the development of Africa. I take this declaration as a call for a review of the development models that have been prescribed and accepted by Africans. And that it's high time we looked critically into the value of African knowledge system to the well-being of Africans. Take, for example, the issue of climate change. When you look at communities in coastal areas of West Africa and look at their experiences regarding the impact of climate change on socio-economic conditions, on security, you'll find that Africans have always had knowledge of what is happening to their environment. But this is often neglected. When knowledge is generated, when analyses are done, they are done in complete disregard of what Africans know about their environment. Now, the United Nations acknowledges the value of traditional knowledge. And Africa has its traditional scientific knowledge, which has been undermined. And for me, how do we now marry African knowledge systems with external knowledge systems for the improvement of the well-being of African people? And so for me, what type of knowledge are we utilizing for the development of Africa? We need to now decolonize colonial development models in Africa. We need to look critically into the development models that we have adopted. The question of growth. Growth is insensitive to the well-being of Africans. We need to decolonize economic development by looking less at growth, looking at the development, real development, human security, looking at the well-being of Africans. Thank you.
Dr. Fidelis Allen. Thank you, Fidelis, for really inspiring us with that idea of revisiting the idea of the mind of Africa and reminding us, in fact, of that rich, not only social wisdom, but also ecological wisdom. Chief, if I may come to you for a moment. You've heard these fantastic perspectives on youth of the future, on connectedness with Europe and the greater world, on new models for education, on ecological metaphor, on the wisdom of Africa in both its social insights and its ecological wisdom. What does this mean to you as one of the keepers of the keys to the ancient wisdom of Africa?
Thank you so much, Mornay. You know, I've been listening to everybody and I agree with everybody. However, there's one aspect that we need to recognize, and that aspect are the community and our women. This declaration speaks boldly of our women. And to empower those women we speak so fondly of are to build the structures. Because this Africa, me, you, all of us, were raised by that strong women. So we need to acknowledge our women, first of all. And the communities at large, this declaration must be taken to the streets, must be taken to the community, because that is the heart of Africa, the community. Without the community, there is no Africa. There will be no super lady called Africa if the inhabitants, the community, are not involved. We dare not speak past. We dare not plan past this community. We dare not do that. So the challenge here I pose to all of us, me include, is to take this declaration and say to the community, this is our declaration. Let us run with this declaration and build it into our structures, into our street committees, into our flat committees, into every structure socially that drives democracy and all the other things that we so fondly speak of. But it should come with a token that women should be the driver of this. And as a traditional leader, I love empowering women because I was raised by a very strong woman. And I'm very proud to say that. And I say this to the world. If it wasn't for them, Africa would not be Africa. Now you see, this woman Africa has been abused by the colonialist thinkers for far too long. And turning back the clock won't make it right. But from here, with this declaration, we should use it as a launching pad to make right all the wrongs done by the colonialist brothers and sisters. I heard Carlos earlier on saying that he's an African. I don't dispute that. Because all life comes from Africa, isn't it so?
Indeed, yes.
So when I say life comes from Africa, he's in Africa. So we should embrace our brothers and sisters abroad. But we must also say to them, you have done our mother a great injustice. You have taken from her soil the many minerals. Please think about what you have done. Look into our communities, into our townships and see what you have created. And the time is now, with this Ubuntu methodology, this thinking, this declaration, come back and correct your wrongs. But we will embrace you because we love you as our children. You are born from us and come back to us. We have given you the opportunity to go into the world, empower yourself, enrich yourselves, but come back to us and rectify the wrongs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I really love that community, gender, and globalization perspective. Zonke, we're going to give an opportunity for those colleagues and friends online from anywhere in the world they might be to perhaps pose a question, make a comment or observation. We're very happy to take their contributions. While the audience is preparing their thoughts, perhaps I could pose a question to you, Solomon. You heard the Chief talk about the role of women, and I wonder if you have a thought on whether a declaration like this that aims to define, however much it may be a living document, the very mind and sense making of ancient African wisdom. Is this something that could be relevant to children, do you think?
This is very relevant to children. The declaration talks about responsibility for future generations. And at the moment, we have climate injustice that is happening. And Africa is worst affected, while it contributes less to the problem, but the problem affects it more. So if we want a just future for our children, those who are born right now and those who are yet to be born, I think this declaration needs to get out there. And another issue that we have as people is we have great policies, strategies, but we lack implementation. So I think we need to implement the Akili Declaration. We need to get it out there in the communities, in the grassroots, translate it to our local languages so that the people in the grassroots could own this declaration. And from there, then we can implement. Thank you.
That's a fantastic challenge to all of us, and it echoes the Chief's sentiments of the importance of structures and the plan ahead for the declaration. I understand there is a question. Please, go ahead.
Sorry. So this is a question for the professor out of Port Harcourt. So I'm sort of following the discussion on African knowledge systems, but I guess I'm just wanting to hear more about what does that actually look like for us as we try and figure out, okay, we're not trying to quote unquote catch up, but we're trying to just figure things out for ourselves and develop ourselves kind of thing. So what do these knowledge systems look like going forward for Africans?
That's Dr. Allen, that's for you. Can you give us more of a sense of what you mean by African knowledge systems?
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that knowledge is an instrument of power in relations between groups or among people. And so the way knowledge is created matters. Now, fundamentally, when you talk about African knowledge systems, you should begin to remember that before colonialism, Africans existed and they solved their problems. They had political administrative systems, they had social systems that worked for society. They had economic models that worked for society at that time. Now, at the instance of colonialism, a lot started to change in terms of what was valuable for society. The ideas that dominated society were no longer indigenous. And since the end of colonialism, even within the post-colonial state, the education system that we Africans started receiving taught them how to undermine the value systems that drove society many years before colonialism. Now, imagine it's a global system, an international system, where the emphasis is on more and more productions, irrespective of the fact that you can produce what you don't actually need. And all that you're producing has implications for the sanity of the planet, integrity of the planet. So when you talk about knowledge systems, you're talking about how ideas are generated, and every idea is generated in response to a problem in society. Humanity has always had problems to solve: economic problems, conflict, crime, health problems. How are these ideas generated? Does it mean that Africa has never had a way of solving its own problems? And so the knowledge system that should drive solutions to problems must involve those ideas that have been indigenous. And now I use climate change as an example, because I've had opportunities to visit so many communities. And when you're in coastal areas of West Africa, where you see that the people depend on the ocean, depend on the water for their survival, they depend on the mangroves for their survival. And now you talk about the oil industry, you talk about overfishing, industrial fishing, overfishing, and all of that. These activities are good, but they are so insensitive to that peasant economy that existed, which was very useful for the local community. And so we don't need that catch-up. We don't need the kind of growth that destroys the future. And for me, Afrik Achilles really is about connecting traditional African scientific traditions with future knowledge systems. So we need to be able to reconcile the Western knowledge system with the traditional African knowledge system that drives change, modest, useful change in society.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fidelis. That reminder of it really depends for the knowledge system, what you are curious about, how you go about seeking new knowledge, producing new knowledge, and then ensuring communities benefit from that new knowledge. Zonke, anything from the audience online?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Dr. Monet. We've got our first question, and it seems it's directed to Mr. Carlos. The first question is about you talking more about this idea of abandoning the fact that Africa has to catch up. What do you mean about that?
What I mean is very much related to what Dr. Allen just said. The relationships between the Western world and in particular Europe and Africa are grounded on the idea that we are developed countries and you are not. Still today, it's a completely colonial, if you wish, neo-colonial framework. Because of course, in that framework, we have all the responses, all the recipes, all the solutions, because we are the developed ones. and we will, we will continue to profit from our advantage of being the owners, not only the owners of the recipes, the owners of the power position that Dr. Allen was referring to, the power position of saying, validating or not, if your knowledge is correct or not. This is completely neo-colonial. And this does not respond, first, this does not respond to your needs of developing in some way yourselves. But we have to question what is development, what is human well-being, what drives human well-being, and we know that human well-being is driven by relationships, by the quality of relationships between people and life at large. And your cultures are more prepared. I'm not saying this is easy. It's not easy for anybody. But my guess, my bet is that your cultures are more prepared to build a completely different pathway to human development based on the quality of relationships, based on Ubuntu. So this is what I'm talking about, abandoning the idea that you have to become like the Western countries, the Western societies. Because, by the way, the Western societies have to abandon the idea to be like Western societies as well. And this is what I was referring to. I think it's a mutual transition. We have to abandon the idea that we are developed because our ways of development are completely unsustainable. And it goes much beyond the idea that it's just about shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energies. No, it's much deeper than that. It's about changing from the idea that well-being comes from having things, having dead things, to the idea of developing healthy relationships with people and with life at large.
Thank you, Dr. Carlos, for that. So it validates that we have to start validating our own stories and trusting our own stories, trusting our own wisdom, as we've been communicating. Before we go to our second question online, I think there's another question on studio.
Thank you very much for the initiative. I think the declaration is inspiring and encouraging for the future, bring us together. I want to ask one question. I mean, the world is changing, right? And knowledge and technology are growing at an unprecedented rate. Whilst we're sitting here, human augmentation, intelligent machines, things are changing. For me, the time to say knowledge belongs to this world or not that world is over, because the borders are falling. In the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have machines that are more intelligent than human beings. And the question is, how do we get ourselves ready as Africa? Not to say this comes from where, but how do we participate? How do we get ourselves ready to be able, not just Africa, but the world, generally the world. So I wish we can draw on our past to say, how do we use the knowledge of the future to shape our present, knowing our past? And not just look at our past and say, how were we robbed? What do we don't have? To say, we are here now. The future is coming. The world is changing. Knowledge is growing. We can see what it looks like. We know our past. How do we use it to shape our present? For me, that's an important question. And I'm hoping that the declaration brings Africa together to consider this question, because if we don't, we will be a nation or a society that's forever complaining about not participating, not being called in, not having that or that. But the time is now.
Zonke?
Thank you for that question.
Perhaps I could ask Dr. Rampela to respond.
I believe that the declaration is an invitation that we as Africans are not looking back for the sake of blaming somebody. We are looking back to find our roots. You can't bear fruit without being rooted in your reality. Knowledge yes, there is technology. Some speak about a cybernetic society of the future. That society, incidentally, one of its strengths is going to be self-organization. Those values of Ubuntu, the village culture, is going to be the node where this cybernetic society with, yes, machines, but machines will never replace the spirit of the person. And what Africa needs is to re-anchor its spirits so that it can be stronger in embracing whatever new technology, but never give up on the values that the world has yet to find a way of embracing. And that is the invitation of this declaration. Yes, we are moving into the cybernetic society, but the values have to be the values of Ubuntu, because relationships is what defines what it means to be human.
Thank you, Doctor. We've got another question online from Gustus, and it's directed to you again. Do you think the knowledge from ancient Egypt, our African ancestors, can be used to move modern Africa forward? So it speaks to exactly what you was just talking about.
One of the biggest tragedies of Africa today is that the education that John was talking to took away, ignored the original knowledge of our continent. Mm-hmm. There is even an attempt to separate Egypt out of Africa as part of so-called Middle East, North Africa and Middle East. No, Egypt is Africa. And you cannot build the pyramids that are there in Egypt without mathematics at a very high level, without the understanding of materials, etc. And yet, because the education that we are giving to our children does not help them to embrace that rich heritage. And so we have people in this country who say that black people can think in 3 dimensions. Black people can do mathematics. Our own government teaches our children so-called math literacy. Really? These are the originals, the heirs of the original mathematicians. And so the beauty of this declaration is that it owns, it helps us to remember where we come from and use that remembrance to know that nothing is impossible. Mm-hmm. And to know that not only are we great mathematicians and architects and engineers, but we are also great in relationality. And without that, we lose our spirit.
Thank you. I'm also going to ask Mr. Christopher to weigh in on the same topic, on the same question. Can our African knowledge, our ancient knowledge, take this continent forward?
It's a good question, and I'll give some examples to show the wisdom that we have, and by so doing, the madness of the Eurocentric structure that is now called globalization. I'll give 2 examples. One example is the judiciary that has been imposed on the African continent. The Eurocentric way of justice is to identify a culprit and a victim, or somebody who is right and somebody who is wrong. Mm-hmm. You go to court and you find out that the aim of the judiciary is not justice. the aim is to listen to the argumentation of the two sides, and whoever argues in a slicker way wins. There is no justice. In the African way, the African wisdom, the African way of arriving at justice is based on reconciliation. We just recently had an example, Rwanda. Terrible genocide. The United Nations, together with the Western powers, wanted to impose a way of addressing that according to the Western way of thinking, which would have been a total disaster, because nobody is interested in the Western way, is not interested in any reconciliation. And so we need to recognize that as a very viable example of how the traditional system was utilized. That is our natural wisdom, indigenous wisdom. Wisdom, not to be clever, but to be wise. To arrive at using the Achaka system. And what is the result? The country that was in the deepest hole, the deepest pit of darkness, has today become a rising, shining example of what Africa can be. A country that is landlocked, a country that is small, has very limited natural resources, and yet, where is Rwanda today? That's food for thought for all of you. Second, this Western imposed madness is in the form of something called ownership. When you go back to the African wisdom, which is represented throughout the African continent, you find out that how can I pick up a stone, a pebble? If I ask the Eurocentric, globally educated human being, if I ask him or her and say, who does this stone belong to? They'll probably say, oh, it's your stone. Chris, you picked it up from your place. It's your stone. Is it my stone? My diamond. My this, my that. The old people who understand African wisdom will say, you're mad. Ownership is an expression of madness. What do I mean by that? How can you, or let me ask the question, how old do you think that stone is? Is it 12 billion years, 13 billion years? When was it formed? How long after the Big Bang? When did the planet form? When did it solidify? When was that stone created? Who are you as a human being? The audacity or the madness to claim that you, with a lifespan of 80, 90 years, whatever, can claim ownership of something that was there before you were conceived and will be there long after. That is another form of madness that has been imported into and superimposed on that which was there before. My sister was just saying in the audience, interesting points. There's artificial intelligence coming. There's technology coming. But the question is, like we say in where we are from, where I'm from, monkey is clever, but monkey no get wisdom. Artificial intelligence is clever, but you cannot program wisdom. And this is the fundamental problem we have today with this drive for technology, thinking technology will solve this and solve that. Today humanity has arrived at a very clever form of development. Today we have nuclear weapons. I just heard recently, just a couple of days ago, there was a report that all war games that the Pentagon, US, has played that involved the utilization of nuclear weapons, no matter how small it starts, using tactical nuclear weapons, and all that jargon. Each and every war game that the Pentagon has published has resulted in total nuclear war. That is the destruction of the planet, mankind. All the cleverness, all this intelligence, military intelligence, the so-called most advanced nation on the planet, they've gone to the moon and come back. They're very clever. They're very clever. But to show you how stupid and how mad the same clever people are, is when you listen to the argumentation of a topic that is ongoing right now, the return of the loot that was taken from the Benin Kingdom, the Benin Empire, 1897, in West Africa. British troops raided and looted the city of Benin, carried over 10,000, that's according to their counting, 10,000 pieces of artifacts were taken away. 2 days ago, a museum in London announced that they're returning, I think, 72 pieces. 72 pieces out of 10,000 that were looted and stolen. And the British Museum, instead of thinking wise and looking for a reconciliation, is hiding behind bombastic, hyperbolic, legalistic terminology and saying that the British Museum cannot return that which is stolen because the laws or the legal frameworks in the UK do not exist.
Indeed, Christopher. And I think it illustrates very eloquently the dilemma, the madness in the face of challenges of artificial intelligence. In the future science world, we have a little joke that says that we must not lose to artificial intelligence only because of natural stupidity. There must indeed be alternatives. Zonke, shall we go online?
Yes, of course. We've got another question for John Gilmore. And the question is, how can we adjust the educational system to begin to encompass the unlearning and the relearning of the abundance mentality for our children to have a different future?
What a beautiful question. I'm sorry I've only got a minute or two. The focus, the obsessional focus on competition in education is a Western imposition on the process of learning. We're even today talking about knowledge as though it exists in some form of quantity. We have to shift all schooling to focus on the process of learning. If we can learn from the Black consciousness movement, there were no degrees conferred in that movement. There were no winners. There were people who took responsible for each other's education in order to raise the consciousness of the individuals and to raise the whole. Surely that's the model for education in this country. The self-liberation, which increases the insight and the self-knowledge to a level of being able to ask the right questions, not provide the right answers. So for me, it is to embrace the abundance of every school in Africa has a living learning laboratory in the space that surrounds the school. 95% of schools in Africa do not have a colonial laboratory. Is that a tragedy or a gift? If you see the abundance, it's a gift, because the chemicals come free in the form of radiant energy, the water, which has chemical components to it, the soil, and the air. We need to build our experimentation, our teaching of children to get their hands back in the soil, to teach the connection between the head, which is the colonial obsession, the heart, which lies at the heart of our indigenous knowledge, and the hand, which we've lost the ability to use. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, John. Zonke, I think perhaps 2 or 3 more, and then I'll give a closing opportunity to our panelists.
Not a problem. We don't have any more questions online, so maybe we should go to the studio and see if we've got anyone else who'd like to ask a question or a comment. We've got another hand at the back there after that.
Here's a comment. Just to say, anything good that comes into the world has got potential to be used badly. And so the point about wisdom and values and ethics with the growing of science and technology is well made, and it's very important. Think about fire. We needed fire. We as African people, right? We found a way to make fire. But fire has destroyed a lot of homes and people have died from it. It doesn't make the fire bad. And it's the same thing, whether it's with nuclear, whether it's with intelligent machines, whether with human augmentation that brings, healing to people suffering with cancer and so on. It can be used for bad. And I think it is important for all of us to know that simply because something has got potential to do bad doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. Just like fire, just like a lot of things we have at home. So we've got to be open and welcome the growth of knowledge and use it for good. Perhaps ask the question about ethical machines. Would it be possible? And perhaps because we are Africans and ethics and values matter to us, rather than reject intelligent machines, we've got to say, is it possible to develop an ethical, intelligent machine and then come up with the science to do that, rather than stand aside and then make a contribution? It will never be as smart as a human. It will never have the consciousness of a human, but we can make a contribution than stand aside. And as a scientist, that's my plea to young people. Do not reject science. Find a way, draw on your culture, on who you are, where you come from, to make a contribution, rather than stand aside and say it's here to destroy us. Because if you don't, you'll stand aside. I promise you, it will be here, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Prof. We've got another question at the back.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Reverend Berry Burr, and I am the chairperson of Cape Town Interfaith Initiative and the Faith Leader Liaison for Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Greetings, Chief and Dr. Rampeli, and all esteemed guests. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I'm just curious about how do we at first, and I think I'm going to speak to this question to our esteemed teacher, how do we get people to really understand each other? Because we have for so long been with not understanding through language, through different cultures and different rituals, different faiths. And how do we get personal understanding into our corporates, into our schools, into our governments? And that would enable us to really take this declaration and say, yes, together we can make it happen. But until then, are we speaking at cross purposes? Are we keeping our polarities just as wide apart as they always were? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Reverend. John?
John, would you like to respond?
Just need the microphone. Difficult conversations on a daily basis must be planned and structured into the curriculum. Opportunity to abandon the power structure of vertical accountability and create the horizontal shared accountability, where I take responsibility for my peers and I take responsibility for speaking truth to power in the context of my learning experience. We continue to create vertical applause structures where we have prize givings and we exclude those who underperform, we have to embrace that every child can understand the values that enable the learning of mathematics. Ubuntu is the framework in which we must learn mathematics. But if we place the value of the learning before of the outcome of the learning, before we place value on the process of the learning, we simply create a competitive framework in which those who can't perform collapse inwards. The liberation is in the process of learning, not in the knowledge itself, because the knowledge is there. The processes have to be reviewed and not decolonized, in my view, Africanized and humanized.
Perhaps, Zonke, while we're there, I'll give an opportunity for a closing remark from our panelists. Perhaps we could start online, and Dr. Allen, may we hear your concluding remarks?
Yeah, I think that the global system, global economic and political system, have been structured to continue to exert power over weaker nations. The injustice around the unjust global economic and political system is about the type of knowledge that has existed, that has dominated policy cycles and dominated the thinking of those who make decisions. So, yes, I agree with the idea that technology can serve good and bad, purposes. But then you see the structure of the international political and global system makes it difficult for the ethical dimension of technology to manifest in favor of the weaker nations. And I ask this question: why are people taking pleasure in manufacturing destructive weapons? And poor countries, Africa has been a key victim of the use of destructive weapons at the national, sub-national community level. So the ethical dimension of production: why do we produce what we don't need? Why do I have to buy a phone that I don't need? Why do I have to buy new phones every year? So I think there are so many issues that we have not addressed. I think the capitalist order is very destructive, and we need to talk about what profit is doing to the well-being of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher, can we go to you for a few brief closing remarks?
I'm intrigued by the question that the lady just mentioned about education and how do we get people together. One of the observations, again, having gone through the Western education system myself, is that everything, one of the guiding principles of Western education is to teach the differences, the difference between an insect and a plant, between a mammal and a mineral, and all that. We focus on the differences, the difference between this ethnic group, that nation, that country. And we should actually turn that question around and make that an integral part of African education. That is the children. Our children, 25%, 25 years and younger, represent over 50% of the African population. They're the future. And so if we want to have a different outcome, we have to change the mindset. And through education, if you start focusing on what do we have in common, what does a plant have in common with a tree? What does a virus have in common with a human being? And maybe you arrive at the conclusion that the human species is nothing more than a planetary, virus. It opens up interesting thoughts. And so this is one of the things that we need to look at. We cannot continue the madness whereby, for example, history, if we look at the history curriculum in most of the African countries, it's to study the history of, it is basically study European history. And the African history is the colonial history told by reading the books of the colonizers till today. And so this is something that we need to think about. And so there are many, many things that need to be, addressed, and it's too short to start addressing all of it. But in a nutshell, if we want a different outcome in the future, we must change our behavior today.
That is
Today,
an elegant
the present is we create the future by what we do today, fundamentally. And so two things we can take away, which is Akili. What is that we have in common? And two, to transcribe that into action, into activity that brings us together rather than divide, and thereby be an example for mankind, humanity, to follow into a positive future. We owe that to our children. We need to encourage them, but the mindset has to change.
Indeed, Christopher. Perhaps John and then Carlos have a final closing thought.
I'm excited about the declaration. I have content for a history class, a maths class, a life science class, and a science class. I think this is a provocation and a gift and a relief that I belong and I can be drawn into something that is exciting and allows me to understand my choices in a framework of abundance rather than in a framework of scarcity. So I'm saying to everyone who's a teacher in this audience, which is everyone, if you're not, you should ask yourself why you're not teaching. Share this. Let's share it. Let's have conversations about it. Let's disagree, but let's actually use it as that provocation and that gift to change the frameworks that Christopher's referred to change the way we have conversations. Afrik, Akili.
Thank you, John. Carlos.
Thank you. I'm excited as well, John, about the Afrik Akili Declaration and what it means in terms of opportunity, what I see as an opportunity for Africa to build on its own resources, on its own strengths, the cultures, the people, the land, to create your own future, not a future imposed by others, as Christopher has so eloquently explained, And since technology has come out, may I recall, yes, science and technology are necessary, but not all science and technology are never neutral. And the ways they are framed matter. So it's more than time to frame them from the questions and the challenges that real people in real places face. Let's not forget that modern technologies, the technologies developed during the last 3 centuries, were developed mainly for purposes of controlling people, of killing people. The military has been the driver of the development of technologies in the last 3 centuries, and that includes artificial intelligence, sorry to say. The purpose of killing people, the purpose of exploiting nature for our own satisfaction in ways which are now so obviously unsustainable because we never took care of the consequences. We never cared about the consequences of the technologies we were developing. It's more than time for you to develop your own technologies. And I think you have them. And I in this context, I always quote Gregory Bateson, who said that, examples of technologies connected with life. Yes, I have some. For instance, cheese and poetry. You have your own technologies, you have your own capacities to develop new ones, but building them from the ground, from the needs of your people, and believe in yourselves, build on your own strengths. Don't expect that technology is developed somewhere else for purposes of control will solve your issues.
Carlos, thank you. Solomon, the final thought.
Thank you. I think this declaration brings an opportunity for Africa to claim its space at the world stage and to redefine, do we have access as Africa or do we have influence on the world stage? And it's also an opportunity to tap into our own resources, into our own intelligence and wisdom as Africa. I was surprised during the onset of COVID-19 when Madagascar said they'd found a cure for COVID-19. No African nation stood with Madagascar. But we are quick to accept if things are coming from the West. If Oxford says we have this vaccine, we don't question it. We just take it as it is. But if it comes from an African country, we question. It's time we have unit of purpose as Africa. And let's implement. Implementation is very important. Thank you.
Solomon. Dr. Rampele will have the final word today, but perhaps you can conclude our panel discussion, Chief.
You know, lest we forget that our very first educators was our mother and our father, our elders. And amongst them, we drew so much wisdom. It's not lost to us. It's never been lost. It was overshadowed by the colonialist thinking. However, we were subdued to the colonialist thinkers, and we were forced to take a back seat and be quiet. Our culture never died. Only a blanket was thrown over it. And rightfully so, we cannot die as Africa. We are alive because we made sure that all over the world we are widespread. So I think it's important that we go back into the communities and educate there instead of using the widespread podiums. That's important also, but go into the heart and soul of Africa, which is the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Gosh, colleagues, what a fantastic, sterling panel we've had. They've inspired us from so many perspectives, and they've reminded me in a way of why I pursued my own interests in future science, inspired as it was by those classic words of one of the founding fathers of the new Africa we're in, Kwame Nkrumah, who said, we look neither east nor west, we look inside ourselves. And as Africans, we look forward. For helping us to look forward and into the Akili, the spirit, the sense and mind of Africa, our deep gratitude to my panelists. Thank you. Zonke?
Thank you so much, Dr. Monet. It has definitely been an inspiring afternoon with a clear call to action. And as you said, we are being called to look within, to look at each other and recognize the healing journey that we need to walk on, the journey that recognizes our own story as Africans. And the declaration gives us an opportunity to do that. I will now hand over to Dr. Rampele to thank our guests for today. Thank you, everyone.
I cannot say how privileged I feel to have been born on this beautiful continent. When we were activists in the late 60s and 70s, one of our goals was captured by Steve Biko saying that Africa, having given birth to humanity and science and technology, has yet to give to the world the greatest gift of all, a more human face. Today, this declaration is a basis for conversations for us to rediscover the beauty of the human face and to see the human face in every person that we meet. And that face will also connect us to the roots of our beautiful continent and make us have reverence for another mother, nature. And nature has lessons for us, that the declaration is an opportunity, it's a living document. Every one of you should take it home with you. Read it. Look at where you think it could be refined. But importantly, look at where you are sitting, whether you're a vice chancellor like my beautiful sister, or a teacher like John, or a minister in the faith community. How does this document speak to your reality? What can be done to make it a live document? So we no longer, I agree with you, have to be saying, they did this. No, we are doing this. And we are going to shape the future that our children and grandchildren deserve to have. I thank you for participating online and in person. And I thank my beautiful daughter, Zonke. You are an absolute quintessence of Black is beautiful. And your heart is even more beautiful. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for being here.
to the Baba Yaya African Performing Arts Academy. Thank you for invoking the African spirit in us. We are now within the space. Good afternoon, Molweni, Lumelang, Sanibonani, and welcome to our studio guests, and welcome to our participants online. My name is Zonke, and I will be your host for this afternoon's webinar to launch the Akili Declaration. I will now firstly call upon Chief Hamish Eris, the Hwab of the Khoi and Sen nations, the Khoisan chief of the Elsis River, Korana Kral, to open the proceedings and to share his dream of the First Nations by inviting all African nations to talk to the vision of a united Africa. Welcome, Chief Eris.
Thank you so much. It says, everyone, that is my mother tongue. Greetings all over the world. Permit me, first of all, to acknowledge and pay respects to our beautiful women in South Africa. Today, the 9th of August, we celebrate our women, which we should do every day. However, we do that every day, but today is a special day on the calendar for our beautiful women. And we would like to take this opportunity and say to them, Happy Women's Day. I would also like to acknowledge that today we celebrate worldwide Indigenous Peoples' Day. Our brothers and sisters who are disenfranchised in their own soil, in their own countries, on their own land, do not be disheartened. We will come back as overcomers. Our ancestors had this opening remarks, and this is called a prayer in today's times. Sida itse kai kwa kwatse abotse sida kwan naun itse sida itse nanuba awere in huna ure ida sida kwa katse ure kai sida geo ka kabu sida itse. This means that let it rain, let us all enjoy the fruits of Africa. When Africa labors, it's like a woman who labors and gives birth to many nations. And it's time for us to join hands and nurture this woman back to what she used to be. Welcome. Thank you so much. Kegangans.
Sida, itse, let it rain indeed. And thank you, Honorable Chief Eris. Now, allow me to introduce our panelists here in studio and our commentators joining online. Our first panelist for today is Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, the co-president of the Club of Rome. Dr. Ramphele has had a celebrated career as an activist, a medical doctor, an academic, a businesswoman, and political thought leader. She was co-founder of the Black Consciousness movement with Utatu Steve Biko that reignited the struggle of our freedom in South Africa. Our second panelist is Dr. Monet Mostert, a full member of the Club of Rome and a global business advisor of strategic foresight and is the inventor of the Mindset Index. Our third panelist is Solomon Ndondo, a 27-year-old peer educator and counselor from Zimbabwe. He is passionate about sustainable development goals, children's rights, and equality. He is the founder of the Africa Rise Foundation and an active volunteer and human rights advocate. With us in studio as well, we have all the way from Spain, Mr. Carlos Alvarez Pereira, the Vice President of the Club of Rome. Mr. Carlos has an MSc in Aerospace Engineering. He has been a lecturer and researcher in applied mathematics at the Polytechnic University of Madrid. He founded and chaired the Inexus Foundation of Research Institute, specialized in modeling of complex systems and big data applications. We also have Mr. John Gilmore, who is a member of the Club of Rome. And as a social entrepreneurial activist, John Gilmore has researched, piloted, and scaled the LEAP Holistic Educational Development Program for economically marginalized African children, living in the townships and rural spaces in South Africa. Also joining us online, we have Mr. Christopher Mbanefo, a member of the Club of Rome, and as an innovator and entrepreneur, Mr. Christopher combines more than 30 years in multidisciplinary activities. He's an aerospace engineer and professional pilot working on leading-edge programs in Europe, the US, and Africa in aviation, IT, renewable energy with organizations and government bodies in areas of applied sciences, sustainability, ethics, and climate change. We also have Dr. Fidelis Allen, a professor in the University of Port Harcourt. Dr. Allen is a professor of development studies in the Department of Political and Administrative Studies in the University of Port Harcourt. He is currently a visiting fellow at the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. Also, he is a teaching fellow in London. Welcome to all of our panelists. I will now start with Dr. Rampele and ask, what is Africa Akili and why now? Over to you, Doctor.
Welcome to this historic occasion. This is an occasion for us to embrace who we are as Africans on this, the mother continent. Welcome to all of you who have joined us in person here in the studio in Cape Town, South Africa. And welcome to the many, many of you who have joined virtually online from around the African continent and abroad. It is appropriate that today, World Indigenous Day, we meet to reaffirm and reconnect with our indigenous roots. Thank you, Chief Aris, for gracing us with your presence as a leader of the First Nations in this part of the world. Yes, it is time for us to become indigenous again, so we can much more feel our interconnectedness, and experience the warmth of our interdependence as a human family. We are here today to launch this Africa Akili as a declaration which is an invitation by the Club of Rome, together with its partners, to all of humanity to witness the symbolic occasion of Africa reclaiming her place in the world as the mother continent, the cradle of humanity, and the cradle of the very first human civilization. The declaration is an invitation to the human family to engage with Africa, and the Africa we sense and we are proud of, so that we might together remember and learn anew and become human again. African people at home and abroad are invited to drink again from the well of wisdom and the rich knowledge heritage of our mother continent. Embrace it. Hear its songs and its melodies. Dance to its rhythms and be joyful. Our world is a troubled world. The Africa Akili Declaration offers the human family opportunities for healing our brokenness, opportunities to work together to explore what a mutual, just socio-economic transition to a more sustainable, equitable future for all could look like. This declaration opens the space of possibilities for conversations between the people of Africa, imbued with Ubuntu, and those of other continents, to explore complementarity and collaboration appropriate towards new ways of living equitably in harmony with one another and in harmony with nature. The declaration calls on each one of us to become part of a human revolution, to break free from the scarcity mindsets and embrace Africa's abundant mindset, to make ours an equitable world for a healthy planet. Are you ready?
Manifesto ya ufafanuzi chanya kwa Waafrika. Uafrika, hali ya uzalendo wa kuwa Muafrika, ni thibitisho la bara hili na rasilimali yake. Tamko kuu la Waafrika katika umoja wao, Afrika Akili, ni tamko rasmi linalotambua Afrika na jukumu lake muhimu katika mabadiliko na maendeleo duniani. Ni utambulisho wa ukuu wake. Ni lango la maarifa yanayowapa Waafrika jukwaa la kushirikiana kimawazo, kimaisha, pamoja na rasilimali yao. Sisi kama Waafrika twatangaza ya kwamba tuamini binadamu sote twashirikiana kwa ubinadamu na bara la Afrika ndilo chimbuko lake. Tunatambua ya kwamba kijumla tabia za kibinadamu zalingana jamii. Tuamini ya kwamba changamoto zetu za tuunda vilivyo. Hekima ya Kiafrika tangu kale yaendelea kutumikia binadamu kwa njia inayojenga hali ya maisha leo na kuhamasisha maendeleo ya kistaarabu. Sisi wa Afrika twatoa mchango muhimu kwa uanuwai wa ubinadamu ulioundwa. Kibinafsi, tuna wajibu kwa utamaduni wetu na vizazi vijavyo. Azimio letu ni kutimiza uzazi bora kwa vizazi vinavyowadia, kuhakikisha tumewaandaa kufuata hatua zetu na kukabiliana na changamoto maishani mwao. Tamaduni zetu za Kiafrika zinathamini ushirikishi, usambazaji na uvumilivu. Afrika, rasilimali yake na tamaduni zake za kijamii tumikia ubinadamu vyema zaidi na maadili haya. Kote Afrika, maneno kama vile Ubuntu na Omenala yametumika kueleza hali zetu za heshima na ujamii. Kutokana na mwingiliano wa watu barani, sote twashirikiana katika ubinadamu sawa. Katika falsafa yetu, utegemeano na uingiliano ni muhimu kwa uelewa wa jamii. Twasherehekea tamaduni za kisayansi Afrika na kuendelea kuchangia maarifa pevu na mapya katika safu ya ulimwengu kwa njia inayodhibitisha ubinadamu wa dunia letu. Twafuatilia mifumo ya maisha na kuendelewa ulimwengu unavyojiendesha. Tunaangalia wakati, maumbile, jamii na kazi kama vielelezo vya mabadiliko ya maisha. Zawadi za kiikolojia kutoka vizazi vya kale zimetupa fursa nyingi zaidi kwa siku zijazo. Hili ni kumbusho kuu la umuhimu wa kuhifadhi na kuendeleza mazingira yetu. Hekima yetu huchimbuka kutoka kwa heshima kuu kwa mviringo wa maisha, kiasili na kiroho. Tunakumbatia fursa zote zinazotujia na kuendeleza unyororo wa nyakati zilizopita, zilizopo na zijazo. Twatumai maneno haya yatawa vizazi vya asili na vizazi vijavyo. Asanteni.